Mike's on, man.
You're live.
Are the green ones extra changes from what we looked at before?
So I'm going to welcome everybody to Ordinance and Policy Committee on May 24th, 2024. Present today are Councilman Schramm and Councilman Klent, City Finance Officer Chandra Phillips, myself, and primary appointed officer in this meeting, City Attorney Mr. Paul Jensen. Mr. Paul Jensen.
Thank you.
The agenda today, council will be looking at three ordinances and looks like a whole chapter.
It's a hodgepodge of policies from the personnel handbook.
Gotcha. Chapter 116.
That,
Floor is yours. I'll let you lead out and you can
Thank
explain
you.
them as we go, Paul.
first of all, let's talk about ordinance 1051, which is noted in parentheses at the top as the regular version. Council may recall that last council meeting, we put on first reading the alternate version of 1051. Since then, I found out yesterday that our contractor really does not want to have the responsibility to be taking on up to 50-some additional outlying customers outside of city limits at the get-go. It's like he said, eventually, when he gets his crew and himself totally acclimated to doing the city, then he's certainly going to be looking to try to take on some additional, but at the beginning, he really doesn't want that responsibility of having to do all that. You'll recall that that was one that was going to require him to take care of all of the billing, but then he would turn around and pay to the city of Winter, the city's share, to cover the costs of the tipping fees, et cetera, using the city's transfer station and transportation of the trash. So I'm asking council to, and what the request will be is that the next city council meeting that we take this one in exchange for what was currently on first reading, and as a substitute, start first reading on this new ordinance. I'm sure we'll end up changing the number, I guarantee we will. But what this one does is this takes those, what Brad, I think you called these the street locked customers that are actually located outside city limits, but whose property can only be accessed on city streets. And so there are 7 of those customers, and they would be the ones that would be covered by this ordinance now. So it would require that our contractor take those 7, and that they would be billed as part and parcel and the same dollar amounts as the regular in-city customers. And they also would be billed the $5 administrative fee, which also then gives them access to our landfill out here west of town. But it would, like I say, it would only take those 7 in lieu of the original plan was to give him as an option to each customer, everybody that was on the, what we have called outlaw tap, or inarticulately called them outlaw taps, which would have been either water taps or electric taps or both outside city limits. There are 50-some of those, but we would pull those off the table at this point in time and just have these 7 included that are the street locked ones. Questions, council?
I think it's ready.
Okay, very good. We'll take that to council next, on the 5th. Next up, you see ordinance 1053. This is an ordinance that actually is a little late, considering the fact that we just enacted a resolution setting the fees for our swimming pool. And as I went back and reviewed the ordinances of the city of Winter, I've come to find out that there was not a specific ordinance that enacted or authorized the operation of a swimming pool. Since we're charging official fees set by city council, we need to have this enacting ordinance. And so that is what the first paragraph does. It authorizes and establishes the fact that we're operating a swimming pool and are charging pool charges to collect it from the users through resolution. It then goes on to provide for CPI annual adjustment starting next year and every calendar year thereafter, unless council at some point in time between now and then proceeds to change it. But if there is no change, then it would enact the annual automatic CPI. The other thing that we did, just for the sake of simplicity, and I'm certainly open to change, this was my choice on paragraph C. When you've got a CPI increase that's calculated, I indicated here that it should be it should be calculated to apply up to the nearest $1/4 or 25 cents. So you didn't end up at 17 cents on top of the dollar or whatever. But like I say, I'm not married to that. I'm certainly open to whatever council wants, but I think this at least starts us on the path that I was told that we needed to start, which is, again, bring these fees into line with the idea that our costs go up every year, and so the CPI provides for some increase.
I'm going to give an example of where I like CPI because I don't like taking big amounts all at one time. Paragraph C, Mr. Jensen, on our $5 rate. Right now, we are experiencing extraordinary, unforeseen and unusual CPI increases. In a typical year, Paul, on a $5 entry, most of our years we were 1.6%, 1.8%. So if you take a rate increase of CPI at that rate, it would, at 1.8 on $5, it goes to $5.09.
But we'll have a minimum of 2%, according to this. No matter-
Okay, minimum of 2.
This does establish.
Yep.
And that's the way we did CPI on several other,
Yeah, we wouldn't have to deal with that
Contracts.
1.9 thing that, or 1.8 we were talking about.
yeah.
So it's $5.10. I'm uncomfortable rounding up to $5.25
Okay.
in that scenario.
Yep.
It would, wouldn't that?
Maybe the nearest dime. I'm sorry, Austin, I just
Well, I
want to
read
throw
it
that out.
different. I guess, I read it that, like,
Rounded up.
it wouldn't go to 525 until it was over 512.
Well, it says rounded up. I mean, if it just simply said
The
rounded,
word up is specifically chosen so you don't end up going down.
If it's
So
508,
you're
you
right.
gotta go to 5 1/4.
right.
Right.
That's why I'm more comfortable either
Because I was thinking.
nearest
the way
dime.
We're only gonna
It
do
would be like
4
every 2
increments.
years,
Yeah.
you know, it might go to the quarter, because.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Or rounding to the nearest dime where 509 becomes 510.
My only concern becomes I don't care about the increment, whether it's a dime, a nickel, whatever, but I don't want the city going down. The next year, if it's 509, I don't want it going down to 505 or
Right.
$5.
Right.
So let me ask you this, is there a provision in here that the council can vote not to take the CPI increase?
Only from the fact that it's an ordinance. And so council can always,
I don't want to change the whole ordinance.
oh, I understand, I
Like if
understand.
it, say it's, you're 5.09,
Right.
okay? We can make a motion not to enforce the CPI increase this calendar year, and next year, then we can go to the 5.25. That's what I wonder if that.
And you can do that by resolution.
Okay,
When you establish your new rate by resolution, that's gonna automatically replace what otherwise would have been an automatic calculation by CPI.
okay.
So you can do that and it still leaves in place the fact that the following year, if you don't come back
Then
and
we
do it
can
again,
go-
you're back into the CPI automatic.
Yeah,
If I may, from the standpoint of working with the folks that are doing the till, it would be very, very nice to have it be an even number, either dimes or quarters.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes a huge mess when it comes to the till. Right now, it's even dollars, and we struggle. So, for
So
years, it was like,
teach them CRT instead of how to count money.
we talked about from the operational end, though, we would have one day that everybody is going
but
up
if
to
you
the
do the
city.
$5 where they come in every day individually,
Management.
I don't disagree. I just know how it's been for 8 years.
So is council okay if we change the paragraph C to a dime? So everything would be calculated up to the nearest dime? Or what are you thinking?
I like your 25-cent deal, and, you know.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay?
I think a dime is that's 90 cents I gotta give him back. You know, so here comes a kid, and I gotta give him 90 cents, and he ain't got any pockets.
Correct.
You know, it'd be the same difference with the quarters. I gotta give him 3 quarters back.
You give him 3/4, he immediately goes up to the concessions and buys 3 ice pops.
Okay. And it'll do the same thing with the dime then, okay.
Ice pops are $1 a piece now. He
I
can't
have
even
no
afford an
idea.
ice pop.
I have no idea how much our concessions are.
I just think the less we have to deal with money, you know, especially with change money, the better off we're gonna be.
Now,
Quite honestly, that $5 to $5.25 is the biggest jump that would represent 5% with the push to $5.25.
there's a caveat with this though,
Okay.
that I didn't explain, and I should have, because this is something that we've applied off of the other contracts like with jail or 911. The other thing that happens is the increase is the minimum of the 25 cents, okay? So you've got,
But we
what would have been
record.
9 cents goes to 25?
Yep,
Notice the rest of the language there. When applied to the subsequent year's increase, the previous actual non-rounded calculation
Right.
is used as the basis. What that tells
so
you is,
509 is the next.
you'll go back
year's.
down to 509 and come off of that, so
To
you
get
might end
your
up at
rate of increase.
517,
Yeah.
and again, up to, so you're really not gonna increase that quarter for 2 or 3 years. Then we'll get to the next step where you'll be increasing above that. And by then, we're probably gonna be back to 2% inflation, 2% CPI.
I think we need to leave it at a quarter instead of a dime or a nickel.
Austin, what do you think?
I think we're gonna go to council with a split vote. I'm gonna say no.
Okay?
Good.
To the CPI as a whole?
I mean, I'm just gonna make it public. The public isn't liking it that that the city took a ton of donations to build that swimming pool. And our public works director and water and sewer director, supervisor have stated that we're spending way less at the pool than we have in previous years. And the city council's raising rates. Don't make sense.
Other
I'm gonna
than, we
vote
might
no.
be spending way less, but it's still a cost to us. And
It is a cost, but
I
we're
understand what
spending
you're
less.
saying, yep.
And
That's why I asked, we ought to have the ability to not take a rate increase if we vote that.
And you do every year,
Okay.
by resolution.
Yep.
You can, by resolution, say, leave them where they're at. The following year, they'll come back into play unless you do that again. So we'll go to council on a split vote. Council can decide.
Good discussion.
Yeah, absolutely good discussion.
We need all opinions.
What?
We need all opinions. I'd rather you speak it and give an option.
Mm-hmm.
1054.
You'll notice that in addition to 1054, below it, you've got a printout of our current ordinance, which is labeled as Chapter 116, Peddlers and Vendors. And I'll invite Chandra to join in here because she commenced the initial research on this for me and actually looked at several communities for what they had, and the one you have here came from Clark, I believe you said?
Crooks. Sorry, now I just remembered what it really was. Crooks.
Oh, from Crooks? Okay. Now I understand. I never understood why we ended up at Clark, but that's always a possibility.
No, it's Crooks.
Crooks makes a lot of sense, because there's a growing little community right outside of Sioux Falls. And they're a smaller community, but yet they're growing, and have a lot of similarities, Winter, as far as size of their operation and things like that, so. But at any rate, this is looking at basically a restructure of the entire concept of these, what we call the peddler's ordinance. Where I struggle, and Chandra and I had this discussion yesterday, and I think we're looking for some input from council. Number one, this is not ready to go to city council yet. I really wanted to start out by putting this in front of you folks and maybe ask you to sometime over the next few weeks, look at it a couple of times and come up with what you think are the best approaches that we can use on this. But where I'm struggling is to define exactly what it is, where we want to require them to register, and probably talk about registering at the finance office. Whether we're talking about the folks that are coming to town on our vendor fair or those types of events, where our concern is mainly just making sure that those who need to be are registered with the state with a sales tax permit. And then, of course, we have what I always used to call, what back in the days, the gypsy ordinance, where the folks came to town that were coming through, whether they were fixing driveways or they were doing work on people's houses or homes or their roofs or things like that. But they were just literally passing through, doing some work, sometimes substandard, sometimes it was fine. But they were here and gone pretty quickly with people's money. And so we wanted to make sure, and the ordinance did make the attempt to make sure that those folks were at least registered with the police department so we know who they are, where they're from, and have some opportunity to do a little background check to make sure that what they're bringing to town bears some indication of legitimacy. So, and Chandra, I would certainly invite any comments you want to start with, and we'll go from there.
So what Mr. Jensen had asked me to do was reach out to other finance officers to see what other cities do. We have a finance officer listserv that I can utilize. I received several responses back, and I actually personally called several of our local towns surrounding us, Chamberlain, Oklahoma, Platte, Wagner, and asked what they do. Winter is different than all of those individual cities because we actually have a full-time, full 24-hour staffed police department. So that does make a difference. We have 2 officers on shift all the time. Plus we have a public safety commissioner and a chief too. So that's one thing that's different. The majority of our smaller surrounding towns, you register with the finance officer turns the sales tax in up to the state and then submits the form over to the police department. That way, if the police department wants to run any background checks, they can because you supply a social security number. Wagner was the one who split, and they did have, if it was a traveling merchant coming through, such as your roofing companies, or for instance, it was well known, there was a gentleman sitting down on the 4 lanes a couple weeks ago selling flags. Someone like that, they did make register at the police department in Wagner. If it was a vendor fair or simply someone who has a local business that's moving from their main business, whether that be their home or their actual brick and mortar, to go to a vendor fair, then they would have them register at the finance office. Every town charged a minimum, it might have been $10, $5, whatever, but every town did charge. Crooks actually charges $100 a pop because they're trying to discourage it in their town because they want to support their local businesses versus transient. I'm not saying that's my recommendation at all. I'm just telling you what I found. Crooks did, their ordinance was very, very lengthy compared to our 2 or 3 ordinances that we have, or paragraphs that we have. I'm not saying where people need to register. I don't care. I know that when it comes to vendor fairs, that's been our biggest backlash, is, they feel that it's too in-depth for someone who works out of their home and sells jewelry or t-shirts or something like that, and all of a sudden you're asking for if it's okay to run a background check on them, which is what our current policy does, and what the form requests. But yet, for someone who's coming through, such as, I know 4 years ago, we had a vacuum salesman coming through, and we had a lot of phone calls from the public saying, is this a legit person? Should I let them into my home? Last year, we had a gal going around selling books. Again, is this a legit person? Should I be allowing them in my home? So for those that aren't local, it definitely makes sense on asking for that background check type of deal. But for your local folks but again, one of our concerns was, and I'm gonna use ESA as an example because they have the largest vendor fair right now in, I think, November-ish. And they've asked questions on what they need to do as well. They have folks from Montana, they have folks from Nebraska, they have folks from Hot Springs, so their vendors are not necessarily just local vendors. Your summer nights, that's your local vendors coming in. Your spring bling fling is local vendors coming in. So we're not sure how to separate that, because you do have people coming from out of state that you don't necessarily know, versus some of these smaller events. I know Mike Scott has been in here several times from the chamber wanting to know best option for his summer night vendors that he's asking to come in. So there's 2 reasons for having these folks register. First one being verifying that they have a state sales tax. Our ordinance actually says that the police department is supposed to get a copy of their sales tax license from the state, which that's what almost all ordinances say across the state, get a copy of the state sales tax license. I think right now we're just having them write it down, but we're supposed to be getting a copy of it too. And then the second is, for those folks that we don't know, should we be letting them come? I think it was Hot Springs, I could be wrong on that, but there was a roofing company that came in, actually maybe it was Mission, a roofing company that came in and said, let us do all your roofs. And then they just pulled out one day and there was a bunch of roofs that weren't done. If there would have been a background check, potentially some of those customers could have been saved some hardship. but
My suggestion is, again, having listened to this, and there's a lot of good information there, but you can kind of see from the finance officer's standpoint, what information is useful to them, what information makes their job more realistic to be able to fulfill those things, or the police department. But what I want to know from the two of you is conceptually, what do you want to see in our ordinance? I can take, whether it's the one from Crooks, I can take our current ordinance and make some changes. I wanted to make this so that council is happy with what we've got on board and something that you can smile with your constituents and say, I'm doing the best to represent your interest here. And there's a reason why we do these things. Here's what we're gonna do. So if you folks bring those to me, the concept of what you want to see, having heard this discussion, we can fine tune what's on paper and make it fill the bill, so to speak. So, like I said, I'm really not looking for answers today. I want to just give you an opportunity to look at this. But go ahead.
It's hard for me to wait. I'm not kidding you.
Sure.
I forget what I'm gonna ask. But isn't it a law that I have to have my sales tax license on display?
You're supposed to, yes.
So-
Yes.
So if these guys come in, we should not have to go anywhere to get that copy of their sales tax license.
They should be able to bring it in.
If they're selling it out of their car, their sales tax license is required to
They're
be
supposed
in
to
their
have it
car.
on site where they're doing their.
And so we shouldn't have to go to the state of South Dakota at all as city of Winter. If you can't show me your sales tax license that I can make a copy of, then you can't do business in Winter.
one of the issues that we found is the vendors that we've started looking into didn't have South Dakota sales tax licenses, they were just selling.
Yep, then they should not be allowed to do business inside the city limits of Winter. But I do, on this section 4 where we have exceptions, right away I'm thinking of the Donovans, okay? So item B, it says, the seasonal sale of agricultural products produced or processed in this state. I like that a whole lot, except I think somehow we need to include like craft items.
So this is a state law, this is simply copying what the state law is.
Okay, but if we were gonna exempt, like, who's the, help me build the fence at Leahy Bowl? Had that big brown house out by
That's all
the
right, we don't want to throw any.
KW, what was his name? He made craft items out of his garage and he would sell them at these
Okay,
flea markets.
homemade craft,
Yeah,
yeah,
and,
State of South Dakota still says you need a sales tax for that.
they do.
okay,
They do.
The exemptions come straight from the state of South Dakota SDCL.
okay. So the corn that I sell, I don't need a sales tax license for.
Correct. If you grow it.
And if you process it in this state, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so no craft items on that.
The other exception that wasn't listed in the SDCL because it's a little bit of a gray area is like if your kid is having a lemonade stand. I think they've got a limit of like, if they make less than $500, they don't have to have sales.
$600 a year.
Oh, 600, okay.
Yep.
I knew that we had talked about what it was and I knew you were gonna look it
People
up.
off the street, don't pay
Right.
them more than
Yep.
600, you'd have to give them a W-2.
Yep,
Or
exactly.
a 1099.
That's
Yep.
right.
So that's what it matches
I
up
played
to, is the
that game all the
600.
time.
Sometimes your employee might have changed names in the middle of the year.
I got them all from the jail.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's the difference from a vendor or somebody coming in for a weekend to sell something in winter and somebody coming to winter and putting a roof on from out of town?
There may not be a difference. One is selling to some extent, services as opposed to vendor goods.
Product, yeah.
But
And-
like the roofer doesn't need to, right now doesn't have to register here that he's coming in to do a roof.
They're supposed to.
So
He
if
should-
if I order propane from the Cenex and Gregory, they have to call you and say, I need to come to winter?
That vendor that's putting on roofs should have the, I'm sorry, what am I looking for? The contractor's excise tax license.
Answers question about Senex. so
I mean, I don't think
That
there's any
interesting.
difference. I don't think there's any difference if I'm ordering fuel or I'm ordering.
I think there's a difference between delivery and actually selling on premises.
Selling your services on the premises. Yeah, I mean, you're calling the Cenex and ordering propane, they're just delivering a product.
But they are doing business in town.
Of course they are. And, do we require them to, the one thing under this ordinance, this is not intended to apply to people that have a permanent brick and mortar presence that are already conducting business, because they're subject to all of the regular business regulation, whether it's sales tax, local taxes, whatever. And we know who they are.
Have we contacted all the people that drive to winter to mow lawns?
Well, and that's a fair question. The reality is.
I mean, I don't want to get this strict, but we're not doing it.
No, I understand, but here's my point. The kid that goes out and mows a dozen lawns, he's kind of like the kid that runs the lemonade stand, okay? But yet you got the guy that's in business mowing lawns, guess what? He's got a license.
Yeah,
He's got a tax license.
yeah, I mean, we have businesses in town that mow for a living.
We do.
And we have guys that drive to winter to mow for a living too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see no problem with it, but according to this, that's how strict you're gonna get.
But they ought to have that sales tax license.
They should have a
in their
sales tax
home-
license.
In their
Yeah,
hometown,
yeah.
which allows him to do business in winter because he's got a South Dakota sales tax license. But if I understand your question, we're not making him come to the city
That's-
finance office
That's
to
what I'm
show
saying,
it.
is it looks like
Yeah.
there's a fine line of who is gonna get a background check and who's not.
Yeah, good word. Because it goes right back, and this was brought to me, we turned down Donovan's from doing their sales thing, okay, in a residential area. And yet, if I remember right, we voted to let a taxidermist occupy a church, and we gave her a sales license, or whatever. We allowed her to have her taxidermy shop in a residential area. Now, I don't know how that compares to a hairdresser.
The conditional use that was granted by planning and zoning was for the health club, and then they asked for the add-on of the taxidermy shop. The health club gym is a conditional use.
Conditional use.
Is that in the list?
Yeah,
Because I didn't know how to answer it.
Yes.
yeah.
I had no idea how to answer it.
So
Yeah.
P and Z acted correctly there
Okay.
with the health club and the
Jim, Brad, the taxidermy shop, because of that extra space upstairs, it was their recommendation to council to also allow the taxidermy shop to happen also. And quite frankly, I think this new planning and zoning board would address it differently, completely different. They would have stuck to the gym, and their recommendation to you as council would not have been for the taxidermy.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I was trying to figure out how that's any different than a hairdresser,
Those are
one or
permitted.
two customers at a time. We're not gonna take up a whole block of parking.
Yeah, and those
Because
are
somebody's
those
having
are
their-
specifically covered in our zoning ordinances
Okay,
to provide for that, as long as the amount of space within the home is a certain percentage, no more than. And I don't remember, is that 25%?
yeah,
I
I
think
wouldn't
that-
know, but that's what we have planning and zoning for, is to look for that
Correct.
stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
Those things are specifically provided for.
Okay, Okay.
Typically they are.
Because I honestly didn't know how to answer it, how we could
So-
not let Donovan's
Yep.
have a weekly garage sale, but we could let her, in a residential area.
And quite honestly, we, on that day that we met with the people that were looking for the conditional use, you advised them correctly. They can have garage sales up to 4 a year.
And that's in here
It's
too, yeah.
clearly in there that
Yep.
it's allowable to classify it as a garage sale and do up to 4 a year, which wasn't satisfactory.
Yeah, they put a spin on it that made, a couple of us look like we were real bad people.
But yeah, the garage sales, I can't remember where I read that. It's
Right
addressed.
here.
Oh yeah,
Item D.
section 4, item D.
Yeah.
I wrote Donovan's right on it because that's the same thing,
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, one of the things, I'm just, Mr. Jensen and I have had this conversation. Planning and zoning and the director, which is our code enforcement officer, have not had legal counsel there to interpret this in the past. Mr. Jensen, I've asked to be at the P and Z meeting each month to make sure that they're being guided correctly. And going back to a taxidermy / healthcare, the board is completely different than what it used to be as far as the members and what their focus is. And I do want to get the director and that board protection also. So the recommendations you'll be getting are going to be a lot cleaner in the future. I'll use the word cleaner.
I think we just need to somehow define if you're, like, I always call it the farm and home show, but if you're setting up at the farm and home show, or
So-
you're going door to door.
Door to door is quite different. The farm and home show,
But, I mean, register, do whatever, I still don't think we should charge a fee. I think if somebody wants to come here and do something, as long as they've applied, so be it. But as far as tracking down somebody that came to town to mow a yard, 3 yards a week or whatever from Mission or Gregory or wherever, I don't think, if they got.
That could be a full-time job, just doing that, especially in the summertime.
Yeah.
Well, but that's where I'm saying. is
Right.
It's all or none. Or else make a definite line in the sand, because if we don't have time to go track down
Right.
somebody that's coming into town doing some business, but yet, if we know, because there's a flyer once a year, there's a bling fling, and we're gonna have our I's all dotted and hammer them when they show up, that's wrong.
It seemed that we caught a lot of crap over that when we show up on day one with cops in uniforms.
Well, and let's be honest about it, there was some knee-jerk reaction going on there that, because nobody had planned for it.
Yep, that's,
Now the discussion has been had.
that's the
planned
point I'm
for it.
making.
And there have been numerous discussions, not only with the police department, but also with, for instance, Mike Scott with the Chamber of Commerce, talking about making sure that the event organizer gets the word out to their vendors that are coming ahead of time,
Yeah.
so that people have the opportunity to know what they need to do before they show up. And that's gonna make next opportunity a whole lot smoother.
I know Mr. Scott's concern was he didn't want the liability on him to collect the information. That way if something came back bad, it couldn't come back on the chamber. He didn't have an issue with saying, by the way, you need to register at such and such, but he didn't want that liability if they didn't register or whatever else.
Right. And under our ordinance, he really doesn't have it, any liability. But I think his vendors are gonna appreciate having some prior knowledge ahead of time so that they make sure they've got their ducks in a row before they show up.
So your first summer nights is June 9th.
Yep.
At this point in time, those vendors, again, there are some exemptions by state law, if it's a club, organization. So for instance, the Softball Association, which is a nonprofit, sells I know when I was doing the summer nights, they sold baked potatoes or something like that. They would be exempt, they wouldn't have to register. The Girl Scouts Club, nonprofit organization selling cookies, those kids, the moms don't get any money back on that in particular. They don't have to have the sales tax, that's state law. So
Yeah.
those are the things, and I think that's where Mike was a little bit concerned too. Is it his responsibility to know who's exempt and who isn't, as far as knowing that? And so, I agree that this is a tough one, and every city that I talked to said, this is a tough one. Where do we draw the line? How do we truly define it? We want to support those who have local business here, but yet we also understand that there's other people that come in that have services that locals don't have. So where do you draw that line? Do you go
When we
chase
did the
down
powwows
everyone?
years back, we had vendors come in and we never even thought about
Right.
checking them. I mean, we were glad they paid their $100 to have a booth. You know, we didn't care if they had a sales tax license or anything.
And this, our vendors, peddlers permit ordinance has been on the books forever,
Yep.
and we weren't doing it, you know,
That's right.
so.
Just in the last year, think how many ordinances were on the books that we were forced to deal with. They become afterthoughts. That's why I'll bet if our, and I've asked the question to our police department, do we know every single ordinance in the book that needs to be enforced? And they do not. It's easy to do moving traffic citations and, but they're the ones that are out there as peace officers.
I guess I don't know, for lack of better terms, I think we need to be lenient until we have this, I think this is gonna be a long process
And
to figure it all
the
out.
beautiful part is we're not in any hurry.
Yeah.
Totally agree with the concept that says, take our time, discuss it well, be comfortable with where we end up, you know, whenever we get there.
But I think one of the premises that we have to keep in mind is, and this might not be the right way to phrase it, but the protection of our brick and mortar people that are making the investment to be in winter. I feel that we need to protect those people's business if it means we have a $200 fee
I saw you nodding your head on the fees, and you were like,
to try to keep them out. You know, I mean that, because the guy that owns a business on Main Street, he's got a significant investment in our town. And so we go to a different town and we encourage Shota Creek to come over here and sell their Indian things, okay? Wow. And then the vendor on Main Street can't compete,
Right.
you know, that kind of stuff, because I got this building to pay for. I gotta pay property taxes. I got all these things, and this guy just comes in and for $10 or $50 or,
But now just, and I was trying
just
to look at
talking.
both sides, you gotta be careful when you say, keep them out, because the exact opposite just happened at the airport. Somebody wanted to make a significant investment but on the agreement that we kept somebody out in competition, and we said no.
That's an exclusive contract, though.
Right.
But
That
we
would-
said keep them out, that's what I'm saying, you gotta be
Yeah.
careful with that, the way you
I-
word it, because that's exactly what they wanted, and we said no.
Right.
You, if there's a chiropractor, I mean, I'm gonna use, well, our professional services, we have them in winter, but we have one optometrist. I'll use that as an example. You can't exclude other optometrists from coming to town
no,
and doing
and I
business.
didn't mean that.
Yeah, but Austin's just clearly stating that we had a scenario like that come to the street sanitation airport committee where there was one individual or one company that wanted to build a hangar but wanted exclusive access to the airport, no transient.
And just to follow up on that, we did have a meeting with the FAA, and they said, no, you cannot exclude anyone.
Right.
But you can put limitations. You can say that they have to have a permanent structure. type of
Permanent
deal.
structure, utilities, much like you're saying with,
Yep.
the-
Yeah, that's all I'm
the
saying
Main
about the
Street.
vendor. The out-of-town vendor that comes here just to rake the cream off the top ought to have a little bit of the milk to pay for as well. You know, and by the investment in brick and mortar in winter.
And I would say a lot of your vendors are used to that in other towns.
They are.
For instance, I'll use the flag guy again. He stopped up to the finance office and said, I'm new to winter. I'm sure that you probably have an ordinance about peddlers, vendors, whatever. I want to know what I need to do so that I can sell my product here. They are used to that. I get probably 10 phone calls a year asking what to do. I send them to the police department. So vendors know, traveling salesmen know that they have to register in all sorts of cities. So we're not definitely unique in that.
Please define the Green River ordinance.
Uh-huh, I remember that.
Wyoming, it's posted in every town that you go in.
Well, we used to have a sign,
Yeah.
Green River Ordinance enforced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had that on our
Yeah.
winter sign, yeah.
Did we really?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I don't, I haven't seen it forever.
Oh golly, I kind of remember that back in
But we
the,
had Green River Ordinance. and-
probably in
and
the
that-
70s, yeah.
That took care of the travel and sales people that came in. Yep, and I violated that when I had IMA for 20 years.
Can I ask a dumb question? What is the Green River ordinance?
That's the ordinance requiring you as a peddler to sign up at the city office to do business in this town.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just posted.
Sure. It's,
And that way the vendor didn't have to question it,
yeah.
okay? And if a city did not have that Green River Ordinance, then you didn't have to go to anybody. You could just go sell your stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Back before ordinances were easily accessible on web pages and everything else where you can easily
Yeah.
look it up now.
In the 80s and 90s, it was a lot easier to do things and not get caught.
Yeah.
Before social media.
Social media, yeah. One thing I wanted you to notice, just so we can get some comments on it, on about the third page of this ordinance in section 8, Chandra had inserted a comment which I think deserves some question, and that is, we don't see a lot of it, but we do see occasionally a food truck come through. It might show up at a special event, be in town for a couple of days and whatnot. She just poses the question, do we allow these folks to come into a residential area? Well, does it matter if it's an ice cream truck in the middle of the heat of summer versus a hot dog truck just driving the town?
When this question
55,000
came up,
pounds.
yeah, when this question came up, we actually had a vendor that was going into residential areas. It was pet grooming, and they were going into residential areas, parking their truck, and several people complained that it was taking up too much traffic space, so to speak, on the streets. So Cody, when Cody was here, actually asked at this time if we wanted to change the ordinance to not allow any trucks or anything in residential areas. I don't know. I know that I have been approached this year about someone wanting to do an ice cream truck. Obviously, I immediately have referred them over to the police department on what to do. Right now, by our current ordinances, they can go into residential areas. But I didn't know if that was something that you guys wanted to discuss. You could limit it to just food trucks can be in residential areas. I don't know how you guys want to do that.
It's good to know some examples though of what's been discussed, so you guys can, because a lot of
Decide.
times we may not think of a certain thing. We might think of the guy with the ice cream truck, but in some of these other examples, we may not, and all of a sudden it pops up and they go, oh, well, we've seen that 2 years ago in this town. Somebody was out working the area, so it's good to know these things. Let's give that some thought and see where we go. I do want to jump forward before we run out of time. We've got about 7 minutes left. And I wanted to look at this and let us have a little discussion about policies. These are some, it looks like random, but they're not random. These are part of the personnel policy book that specifically talks about areas where, whether it was for disciplinary issues or grievance matters, things like that, it has always been that the HR department was kind of front and center on those things. We started, Chandra and I and Jody had several discussions recently about this and really have made a decision consciously to come forward and recommend change on this policy. Number one, our HR department has got plenty to do without having to take on things like the grievances and the disciplinary issues, potential terminations, things like that. And so what we basically have recommended is pull that out of the HR department, assign it over to the city attorney's office, and as a backup slash assistant under the current scenario, we may see some changes in the future, but under the current scenario, it allows me to select the finance officer to be my assistant on some of these, whether it's an investigation, or maybe I'm gone for a few days and there's something that pops up that requires some, at least an immediate semi-resolution to maintain status quo until we get a chance to investigate and check it out. And so that's essentially what's going on with all of these things that you see in front of you on these pages, is we've selected any provision within the personnel manual that had the HR director involved in these things. We've made the change to take it out of there and put it in primarily the city attorney's office with the the assistance of the finance office along with city attorney. The one exception to this, and you'll see it on the first page, just because numerically it showed up sooner in the manual than some of this other stuff. This is the side issue where we had the ADA issues, and we are required to have an ADA compliance. Most recently, number one, the HR director has never, to the best of my knowledge, as I can determine, we've really never, number one, we haven't had an ADA complaint, but number two, the HR director has never had any training on it, no knowledge of it, and no reason to think that that position is in a better position than anybody else to be able to handle.
I thought not long ago, and maybe that was only by name, not by position,
You're heading down the path where I'm going.
because we appointed Bertram to be
We did,
the ADA guy,
Council.
but we've never appointed Chelsea.
correct.
So I didn't know if
She had
that
to get
was,
through her 6-month review before she could be recommended.
She will be, yes,
okay.
she will be, but that's the.
So it should go to
That's
a
the direction
name,
I want
not-
to do, is get code enforcement officer inserted into the ADA portion of this. And notice on
If we
paragraph
put that in
3,
here though, doesn't that make that automatic? Whoever is the code enforcement officer is then is ADA complaint person?
they will be under this. Now, they'll still have to go into the 6-month provision. That's why it also indicates in here, this is with the assistance of the city attorney.
Sure, sure.
City attorney is always in a position to help the city and to guide the responsibilities through on ADA compliance. So that would be there. Performance evaluations. Where they are maintained currently is HR. Performance evaluations, you recall, they include information from all 4 quarters, that by the time you get to the annual with the other previous 3 quarters stapled to them, come up to the HR department. realistically, and I think the consensus is that those ought to be off in a separate file that correlates or at least has some relevance to maintaining if there are discipline issues, because discipline issues show up in those evaluations.
I
And
thought
so
we had decided those should be in your office.
That's what this spells out.
that's what
That's what
this
this is spelling out,
Okay,
Brett.
This requires that we go that direction. Right now, what's in my office, Brad, is we are already maintaining those evaluations for the appointed officials. Those stay in my office.
I think what Brad's referring to is, he was part of a committee that when we were off camera, we talked about the fact that we were changing these rules.
Oh.
This is just the official changing of those rules. We told you what we were wanting to do
Okay.
off camera, and now
Austin,
we're
you were
officially
familiar
have
with that
that.
conversation also, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think all of council is 100% had those conversations, because,
Good point.
but just
Good point,
FYI.
But I don't know that this says anything about where they're to be.
It does.
It does, actually.
I saw that, Brad.
Oh,
It
okay.
is in there.
I just haven't read.
Yeah, you
it.
just haven't read it yet.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
City attorney with a copy of the 3 quarterly reviews, that's where it'll be kept under performance evaluations. Exit interviews will go to the city attorney and be kept there.
yep. And anything to do disciplinary puts the city attorney in primary responsibility on these things in places where it used to be the HR director. What we really, I think everybody is agreeing to is that the HR position really should rightfully be what HR originally started out to be, which was your benefit programs, taxes, things like that, health insurance.
Resources. It's
Resources.
literally in the name, human resources.
Yep.
You are a resource for your employees.
Yep.
So does that mean that if they come to ask the question, how do we do this, that the HR director can say, here's the policy, you need to go report over to the city attorney? That's a resource that they can give. They just don't take the information anymore. So it's just a defining of best way. So best practices, I'm not sure if either of you have actually sat in any of our legal proceedings that we've been through as far as personnel side, but they're gonna ask for your city attorney and then whoever your insurance representative is, which your finance officer is your insurance representative. If your HR is involved, because some cities are small enough that HR does do it all, then they'll ask for that too, mostly because they want access to that information that's in the file. So, it was just a cleaning it up a little bit, and then again, to have it spelled out in policy helps us later on in any potential litigation as well.
Yep.
That we have it very clearly defined, we have it separated. I believe, if I remember correctly, so when it comes to files already of employees, you have to keep out separately what their benefits are in their folder, what their retirement forms are separately, your personal information, actually like so we require a state-issued ID or a federal-issued ID, 2 forms of ID that comes with your, is it ICR or IC9, something like that. Anyways, when you fill out your W-2, you also fill out that you are or you are not an immigrant. And that's part of the information that comes through. And that doesn't even get stored in their files anymore by state and federal laws. That's a whole different file that we have to go through annually and start getting rid of things and updating things. So from our standards on the HR side have gotten a lot more strict. And so we're just trying to slowly start to upgrade where we're at so that we can get them in line better and easier to find. I remember when I first came, because there were so many hands in the bucket then, because it was your finance officer was your HR director. And then to do both jobs full-time was kind of a mess. So then you designated a couple other people to help you. So then you had 3 hands in the pot. then it becomes an issue of everyone's putting things in different places. Not everyone goes to the trainings or gets certified in these trainings. And so to better define that with one specific person makes a huge difference.
So from my perspective, there'll be files in my office under my key, and there'll be one other person that'll know where the key is, and that's the finance officer, nobody else. At any rate, that's what'll be in front of you. There'll be a resolution to adopt these changes in front of you on the 5th, so I wanted you to have a chance to look those over.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Yep.
Not bad. 11 minutes, not 7.